Lippert called Tiny Buttons. And this Tiny Buttons is a bracelet design that she did. She kind of came up with a design for the button bead. And then in conjunction with the manufacturer, also the little Super 8s here are used. So these are some materials that I actually haven't used in a video. And Sabine was nice enough to let us put her pattern up on our website for free with the purchase of the materials. And she also was kind enough for me to offer that I could do a video for it. So this is going to be the Tiny Button Bracelet by Sabine Lippert. And again, it uses the button bead and then the Super 8 beads and then some other seed beads as well. If you need any of the materials to do this, you can look on the left-hand side. We'll do little drop downs to the links of the materials that you can purchase from me online. Or if you don't see those little drop downs, underneath the video, there's a description of what the video is about, which has the date and some other information. There's usually a down arrow or a little show more button. You can click on that and we'll have links to all of these different materials as well. So the button bead, if you have not used it, is a cone-shaped bead with a hole actually at the bottom. So when you're looking at the button bead, it looks almost like it would sit with a point at the top, but it actually sits with the point at the bottom and then with the flat side on the top. Hence you can see it here. When you see it on the back, you see just a little nub or a little bead there. That's because the hole is centered more towards the bottom rather than towards the top. So that's the button bead. And for this bracelet, I'll be using the white blue luster, which has kind of a white greenish Picasso finish to it. You're going to use approximately 11 to 13 of the button beads, depending on kind of your wrist size and whether or not what size clasp you want to do. You could even use up to 15 depending on the size. It also is a pretty necklace as well if you would want to do it that way. In addition to the button bead, which sits in the center of each of these little components, are the Super 8 beads. So I have them in the metallic sun color, which is more of like a lime green, and you're using 8 of them per component. So depending on how many components you need that amount times 8. In addition to that, we're using 15-0s and 11-0 seed beads. I have the Montana Blue Gold Luster in the Miyuki 11-0, and then I have the Miyuki 15-0 in the Crystal Labrador Full, which is that check coating or union between the two kind of manufacturers as well. So I have, those are kind of my seed beads. Then in her pattern, Sabine used 3mm crystal bicones. Because we manufacture them, I have here the 2x3mm crystal rondelles, the Potomac crystal rondelles, in that metallic blue color. And they come on a strand, and you're going to use 4 per component, but one of the components you're actually joining. If you check out Sabine's pattern, she actually has them joined more of a square than a diamond shape, so you would use a couple more of the actual beads when you're, or the crystal beads when you're looking. I thought it added a little bit more interest to do it on the diamond. So I'll go ahead and tell you guys how to do both the way that Sabine has in her instructions and then also how to do it on the diamond like we'll be doing together. I have a size 10 beading needle here that I'm working with, as well as some 0.006 green wildfire beading thread and a needle nose pliers in order to kind of pinch down on the end of the thread to make it easier to thread your needle. I also have a thread zap handy, and this is the Thread Zap 2 by Beadsmith. There's also the Ultra or the Cord Cutter by Wildfire. I kind of use them all interchangeably. I also have a cup button sitting here, and this is the white baby blue luster that I'll be using to kind of pull in to this white blue luster button bead that's in the middle with this green and blue theme that I have going on. To get started, we do use all the materials right away, and we're going to be building onto the bracelet. I'm going to show you how to start the bracelet and then how to build on. We will be adding the clasp at the very end of the project, so you'll want to leave some thread at the end of your project because you're going to go back and actually add the button to it. So to get started, I want you guys to get about 5 feet of beading thread onto your needle and make little piles of all of your beads. So to get started, I have my little piles of beads here and one of my 11 seed beads on my needle and thread. I'm going to let that drop down until I have about 8 to 10 inches at the end of the thread. The reason I'm leaving that much is because I'm going to go back and actually add on the clasp. To do the stop bead, the thread is going to come through the bead 2 times, which we will eventually take off the end of the thread. The pattern is pretty simple once you get started. It's going to start with a Super 8, then a crystal, and a Super 8. In between the Super 8, crystal, Super 8, you're going to add a 15, 11, 15. Start that pattern over and you're going to repeat it 4 times. So I'm picking up that pattern again 4 times. Oops. And as I have it and kind of start to put it on, I'll let it go down to the bottom to my little stop bead there. That way I don't have to hold on to it as much. And continue on with the pattern. If you haven't worked with the Super 8s like I haven't, they're basically a smaller version of the Super Duo with a little bit kind of a wider side basically. They go in more at the end and puff out more in the middle. After you have 4 groupings of that pattern, which again is the Super 8 crystal Super 8, 15, 11, 15, you're going to let that all drop down next to that stop bead. This is going to be the pattern, the whole bracelet. So that's going to form each of our units. To make our unit in a round, take your needle and thread back through the first Super 8, through that same hole that you already went through, the crystal, and the second Super 8. Pulling that tightly then, we'll start your little formation there. You can see that little first little section. To get to the middle and to kind of pull it in and to go through the second hole of the Super 8s, take your thread and your needle up through the second hole of the Super 8 that you're coming through. What that's going to do is expose a tiny bit of thread on the side of that Super 8. But the nice thing is, because of the color of the thread, you don't see it at all. From there, I'm going to string through the next Super 8. So whenever the Super 8s have a crystal between them, I'm stringing right through without putting any extra beads on. Above the seed bead section, I want you to add an 11L. Then string straight through 2 of your Super 8s. And then you're going to add a seed bead. And the seed bead we're adding is an 11L. And then we're stringing through the 2 Super 8s. So again, we're stringing through 2 Super 8s in a row when it's above the crystal. And above the seed beads, we're adding 1 11L. And I'm doing that 4 times. Once you go through them all, get that 4th one in, give a tight little tug there, and you can see it will pull your first unit together. So it kind of pulls it in there within 11L. It's going to sit right kind of inside of the 15-11 combination, and then the Super 8s come together in a V shape right where the crystal is. To add a button, I'm going to go through my first 11O that I added and bring the needle out. Pick up one of the button beads and go clear across to the other 11O. So you're skipping the second 11O and going to the third 11O. I'm going to go into the third 11O with my needle on the same side as the thread is coming out the first 11O. So the thread's going to go to the right hand side of both of those seed beads. As I pull the button in then, the thread comes out on the left hand side of those seed beads. I'm going to go back through the button so it gets 2 pieces of thread through that button bead. and then also go through the left-hand side coming out the right of that first 11-0 seed bead. That's going to make sure that your button bead sits correctly in the middle. Give a nice tight pull and kind of tighten up the project. As you progress, you'll notice that it does sit kind of puckered up a tiny bit. The first one may not sit puckered up until you go back, take the stop bead off and add your clasp, because that outer edge may not be pulled completely tight. To progress then and add your next unit, go through the middle hole of the super duos. Oops. Without getting a knot. And get my tail out of the way there. And once you go through that hole of the super duos, we're going to spin around so we can come out that little crystal there. And I've gotten mine all tangled up, so I'm going to untangle that for you. And make it easier to see what's going on. There we go. So I'm coming out this super 8s towards the middle. I'm going to go from the top hole or the inner hole of the super 8 to the bottom hole of the super 8. And that's of the same super 8. From there, what I'm going to do is start my next unit. So my next unit is going to begin with one of my crystals. The crystal that it's going to begin with is the crystal that's already there. In Sabine's pattern, she starts and comes out one of the 11-0s and builds it so it's rectangular in shape. Again, I'm building it on the diamond shape, so I'm coming out one of my crystals. From here on, we build that same pattern of 8, kind of those super 8s, 8 super 8s with a little spacing in between onto each individual unit. So it progresses and the units get added together. So when you're coming out the crystal, we're going to start those units over. To start the unit over, coming out the crystal, we're going to add a super 8. And then we're going to start into our 11, 15, 11 rotation. From there, super 8, crystal, super 8. Let that drop down a little bit. Next, we go in and add our seed bead spacers, which go in between the super 8, crystal, super 8. Another grouping of seed bead spacers, which is the 15, 11, 15, and then into the super 8, crystal, super 8. After that super 8, crystal, super 8, I'm going to add my spacer seed bead. So I have the 11 with the 15s on the side, and then 1 super 8. Take your needle and thread then and go back through the crystal that your thread is coming out of. And that's going to pull it into a circle and get you another unit. From there, you want to take your thread and needle through the first super 8, through that exterior hole that your thread just came out of. Get that tail out of the way. Give a nice tight pull. You don't want any extra thread showing around the outside. From there, we're repeating what we did before, going from the outside bottom hole of the super 8 to the top hole. Whenever the super 8s are right next to or above a crystal, you're stringing right through the super 8s. Whenever you're above a seed bead section, you add an 11-0. And you can see I'm just rotating it in my hand to make it easier to complete that task. So I have the 11-0, and then I go through the 2 super 8s, add an 11-0, and sew through 2 super 8s. Give a tight pull, and that'll kind of pull some of those super 8s in. and continue on until you add 4 11-0s and string through all of those second inner holes of the Super 8 beads. As I add my last seed bead, I'm going to go back through the first 2 Super 8s and kind of pull the thread in and push the beads down a little bit with my finger. And that's going to get them to sit nicely. From there, go through the first 11-0 that you added, and we'll add our tiny button bead. Because this is the first time that I've worked with the Super 8s, I was kind of amazed when it was called the tiny button bracelet. As I started to make it, I thought, oh, these are tiny little components, because it's even tinier than a mini duo. It's about the same length as a mini duo, but it's kind of tinier because those sides go in so much. So I'm coming out the first 11-0. I grab one of my button beads, and I'm going to go to the 11-0 across, staying to the same side of thread, going through the 11-0 and coming out on the left side of that 11-0. So back through the button, and then go into the left side of the 11-0 that the thread was originally coming out of, and you'll come out the right. Tighten that up, making sure that you don't have any additional thread showing. Once we do that, then we're on to our next component again. So to repeat the components, I'm just going to sew back through the Super 8s then until I get to the Super 8 that's part of the crystal on the next corner. So from the top hole of the Super 8 down to the bottom hole of the Super 8 and get ready to start in again. So we're sewing through the interior Super 8 holes, working our way over to the crystal that sits on a diagonal. Because it's a diamond component, it would be really easy, like I said, to make this a necklace and come off the other side and kind of add something fancy at the bottom too. So if you guys get the Super 8s, you'll have plenty of Super 8s left because you use very little, and play around with them. Once you're through that Super 8 combination there, that's part of the next, like I said, bead that would be part on the diamond. You go from the inner hole of the Super 8 to the outer hole of the Super 8. And then additionally through the crystal bead. Coming out the crystal then, you just repeat what I just taught you, adding in all of those seed beads to the outer area, bringing them in, adding the button, and progressing on, getting them further and further along in the design. So once you have enough of your components to make the length of your bracelet, and again I said between like 11 and 13 for my wrist size, I have 11 beads on, or 11 of the button beads I should say, and I have room that I'm almost missing just one component till they touch. The cup button will take place of that component there. If you wanted to get fancy too, you could make one of the components as your actual button clasp. So there's an idea too. So on the side that I'm currently working on, because that side has more thread, I'm going to dump out and use a bunch of my 15-0s to make my, or I'm sorry, my 11-0s to make my loop for my button to sit inside of. So I'm coming out one of my crystals and I'm going to add a 15-0, and I'm going to add 26 of my 11-0 seed beads right in a row. I'll pick these all up. If you're using a clasp, you probably would want about 1 15 and 2 11s before putting on your wire guard and then your clasp. With the buttons, this will make the loop big enough. So I'll put about 25 or 26 of these on, probably about 25 since we have the crystal as part of it also. And then I'm an eyeballer, so rather than counting, I'm just going to eyeball it and make sure that the loop will be big enough, which it will. Add another 15 on the other side, and go back through the crystal. Repeat then, going back through all the seed beads and back through the crystal in order to reinforce your clasp. Once you're done going through twice and even 3 times, then you can bring the thread and needle further back into your project and actually knot off the actual project here. So I'm going to go through and come out along the side and just do a sewer's knot going underneath the bridge thread, or the thread that goes between the beads, making a loop and then sewing through that loop 2 times with your needle and then pulling it tight, making sure it's between 2 of the beads. And I'll do this a couple of different places and then just take my thread burner and burn the end of the thread off. What you want to do then is go down to the start of the bracelet, take off your stop bead and get your thread so it's coming out the corner crystal, just like if we were getting ready to add another one of our units. So coming out the other end here, like I said, you want to get so you're coming out the crystal, and I have my thread with my needle, and I'm going to add 2 11-ohs, then one of my super 8s, and then 2 more 11-ohs, come up through the back of the cup button, so that way my thread is coming out the bowl side of the button. When I'm out the bowl side of the button, I'm going to grab another super 8, as well as 3 15-ohs, and of course I'll have to pour out another one of my 15-ohs here, and get those 3 15-ohs on my needle. Take the needle and thread then down through the other side of the super 8 and the cup button. I have to rethread my needle. This is one of my kind of pet peeves with working with the tulip needles, is their eye is actually really big, and as you get to the end of thread, it's really hard to kind of keep it down there. That's why I usually work with the pony needles. And once you come out the other end then, you are going to go ahead and put on 2 more 11-ohs, go through that super 8, add 2 more 11s, and then go into the crystal on the opposite side that the original thread when we did the button was coming out of. So then you'll end up with a little bit of a link almost to create and to hold on the button. Go ahead and reinforce the thread then, going through everything that you just added, up the side, going through the button then, and reinforcing. After you reinforce, you're going to tie off the thread down around the project, and you'll actually then be finished with your tiny button bracelet. After you're done then, you're actually finished with that tiny button bracelet, and you can see kind of the look of it on my wrist in proportion. It is rather slim and tiny, and it's actually, each component is kind of no bigger than a cup button. Again, if you need any of these materials to do this tiny button bracelet, you can go back to the beginning of the video to the little drop down, or depending on your browser or what device you're using, below the video to the little description and the date and that kind of show more button to get links to use as well. And again, I want to thank Sabine Lippert for allowing me to do this tiny button bracelet as a video. And again, if you guys want the written tutorial for that, you can get those for free with the products when you order them from us online. And there's some other fun Sabine projects on there too, and you can check out all of her stuff. We'll put a link into her designs as well. So if you want to stay connected with us too, get more patterns, more ideas, and see new beads like the button bead and the Super 8, as well as new patterns, you can always subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Facebook and check us out at PotomacBeads.com. Check us out on Instagram and Twitter and all of those good places. As well as on Facebook, you can become a member of our beading group for beading and jewelry making. There you can share ideas, share what you've been working on, interact with a great group of beaders, and ask to become a member there, and we'll let you in. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have fun making this tiny button bracelet.